Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video I wanted to talk about the links between Brexit and Russian dirty money. This is a very topical time to talk about this sort of thing because of all the things going on in Ukraine, the questions about sanctions and so on. So this is actually going to be more of a political video, or political analysis video I should say, rather than one strictly about negotiations and negotiation principles and so on. However, what I want to stress is it's important to do this sort of analysis as part of preparation for any negotiation. This is because it's worth understanding the motivations underneath what drives the other side. And quite often they don't want to admit that sort of thing to you. So digging into what is happening behind the scenes can often be extremely influential when it comes to putting together negotiation strategies, for example, and understanding what is actually happening. On this channel, I like to talk about Brexit and politics and so on, so here I get to combine the two, so aren't you lucky? Before I go into the main theme of this video, a little brief synopsis of how British politics works, particularly for people who might not be too familiar with what it is. And I'm not going to delve into this in too much topic, just in too much detail, just focus on the bits relevant to this video. And the specific thing I want to talk about is how government policies are made. And the truth of the matter is that government policies have a very loose association with what people actually vote for, which may seem like a very odd thing in a democracy, and it is. It's one of the fundamental issues of British democracy. What people have to understand is even though they may be voting for a party, let's say you vote for the Conservatives and the Conservatives won in 2019, their votes are not as influential as other factors that can influence the Conservative Party and government policy. Now, there's a whole host of things go into that, and some of it is quite mundane. Obviously, political parties can say whatever they want until they actually win power. And then once they actually get into government, then they get to see in-depth information, analysis and so on produced by the civil service, and then they get to realise the sheer stupidity of what it is they were saying, whilst campaigning. So naturally, certain policies have to change to reflect reality, not wishful thinking. However, that's the nice side of the story. What many people have to understand in British politics is that there's a fundamental tension between manifesto commitments and what happens behind the scenes, particularly when it comes to political donations. Now, this is not an axe to grind against any political party. This is a problem for all of them. So, obviously, political parties have to be seen to be delivering manifesto commitments, and they will usually make a nod towards doing so. They will try and say that they have achieved, whatever policy and delivered it and, done what the voters have given them the mandate to do. But those policies do conflict with those who fund the parties. Now, in the case of the Conservative Party, that has very much been traditionally a smaller number of very rich donors, and they may fund the Conservative Party for purely altruistic reasons, and they may not. And in the case of the Labour Party, traditionally a lot of their funding came from the unions. So what this means is that when either of those parties got into government, they will quite often find that their manifesto commitments, or what they implicitly perhaps promised the electorate, conflict with what those who funded the parties actually want. And then they've got to find a way of balancing that. So being seen to deliver on their promises whilst actually keeping those that fund them happy. And it's all very behind the scenes, not very explicit, and you have to really be into the guts of the political party machinery to understand which side of that argument is winning at any one time. But what that means is that ministers who run the government come under pressure quite a lot. And this can be in various forms. It can be direct direction from the party leadership. This can be, for example, them being approached in the House of Commons bar by an MP who says, oh, I've got a constituent, and let's say there's a company constituent, who wants to win a government contract, who wants to be more involved, who thinks the government is not making good decisions. This happens all the time. And so ministers quite often will say to those MPs, okay, send a letter to my office. Those MPs will then draft a letter to the minister's office, and they will say, my constituent party, my company thinks that they could do this job better, for lack of better words. Of course, what they won't divulge is how much donation been done by that company, whether to that MP directly or whether to the party as a whole. But that letter goes in to the government department, and with the ministerial stamp behind it, gets pushed into the civil servant to have to deal with. So that means civil servants have to find a way of responding to that interest. And they could try and reject it. They can say, well, we're running an open competition, for example, and such a company should have bidded for it, or actually the company did bid and they were assessed fairly and found not to be, in compliance with the bid, whatever it is. Or they may set up a meeting with said company as a result of that approach, and that company gets to influence the decision-making happening within that government department. That's using the MPs, whether paid or unpaid, I should stress. And we know that Owen Paterson did this paid. We know very many MPs do this unpaid. Whether you think that is the right thing or the right way to influence government policy is a matter for debate, but that is what happens. And of course, companies and individuals will approach ministers directly. And again, I should stress that this is not always financially motivated. Sometimes they're doing so because they genuinely believe they have something that the government should be aware of, should be involved in. But sometimes it is as simple as they want to win a contract, and lurking very quietly behind the scenes will be the fact that those companies, those individuals have made a political donation to that party, or even several parties. Let's not make any illusions about it. Several people will play all sides to make sure that whoever wins, they get a little foot in the door, shall we say. So this is what we have to recognise about British politics, is that behind the scene, the influence of those companies, those individuals, on government policy and decision making can be far more influential than even 1 million votes. Behind the scenes, they get to make approaches, they get to make their case. And sometimes that case is made with financial backing, and sometimes it's made for more genuine reasons. Who knows? But that is how British politics works. And that is one of the issues about the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability that is prevalent in British politics today. So now we come to the main thrust of the question. Did Putin influence Brexit? Has he been involved? Well, the short answer is not proven. There's not any smoking gun evidence that I'm aware of that anyone can come up with and to say that Putin himself has made Brexit happen. But in the context of how British politics works, there's a few things worth mentioning. When it comes to the motivation of Putin, it is not really any secret that Putin would be in favour of Brexit. This is because he doesn't like the European Union, and he would have seen the facts that the UK splitting off from the European Union would weaken both sides, weaken all his adversaries. So for him, there's a clear motivation to support in Brexit, to support his geopolitical aims, shall we say. So that's motivation. Does that mean he had actually been involved? Well, this is a lot harder to establish, and there's two particular angles really worth knowing about here. One is the money. Has Putin, or the Russian state, maybe I should say, found ways to fund Brexit? And the answer is we don't really know. But what we do know is that the Leave campaign was found by the Electoral Commission to have broken the law. And there's a deep suspicion that they've received illegal campaign finance. But it's hard to tell because a lot of this money was funneled through shell companies, for example, those located on the Isle of Man, with not very clear links on who owns those companies, or even who gave that money to that company, who then gave it to the Leave campaign. So there's always been this whiff that by various indirect means, Putin and or his oligarchs have found ways to fund Brexit to help them with all those campaign expenses. And that's not been proven, but that has been a deep suspicion for many years. We also know that behavioral science is a big theme here. Russians are big into this, and it's been very much reported in the news for many years, not just in the UK, but across the world, particularly in Europe and particularly in the US, that Russian agents will fund various things, particularly on social media, that helps the cause. In previous videos, I've talked about the way people have been manipulated into thinking in certain ways. And there's big money in this, there's lots of companies in this, and that happens in normal elections. And Brexit was not a particularly normal election. Lots of money went in that people cannot be truly clear on where it came from. Some of it we can. So, for example, we know that the owner of Wetherspoons, Michael Martin, perhaps a very odious individual, matter of opinion there, but he has supported Brexit and he supported Boris Johnson directly because that is what he believes. So it would be wrong to say that Russian money and Russian behavioural influence is what swung Brexit. It is not the only factor. There are plenty of individuals who themselves just believed in it and supported it and funded it. And Wetherspoon chain is a classic example of that. There are others. But what we cannot be too sure about is that whether through financing or direct action, Russia didn't nudge various people into having less than total faith in their government, because that is one of the things that Soviet propaganda, Soviet thinking was, for many years, was that the way to defeat the adversaries was to undermine trust in democracy. And they still do that. That is a lot of how they operate. That's a lot of what their agents are doing when they're putting, denials, advertising, question, propaganda, whatever it is on Twitter, on social media, on Facebook, and so on. They are doing that deliberately on a mass scale to make the population not believe their own government. It's a deliberate strategy. And some of these techniques were used during the Brexit campaign. Was it done by the Russians, or was it done purely in support of the Leave campaign? Well, everyone knows about Cambridge Analytica. That is an example of how they were able to influence the campaign in support of the Leave campaign. But that linkage with Russian money is not clear. However, there's another side to this argument as well. And we know, and this has very much been reported recently, that a lot of Russian money has gone to the Conservative Party directly. And of course the Conservative Party right now are the ones pushing forward and implementing Brexit. So the question then arises, has that money been given to the Conservative Party on the understanding they push forward certain policies? They would say not, of course. But we don't know. So we don't know if by indirect means Putin essentially is funding the Conservative Party. There are far too many questions to ask about that money, where it's come from, and why it has been given. And many people would cast doubt on the belief that individuals of Russian background are giving money to the Conservative Party for altruistic reasons. And there is one final point that I want to make here. That so far I've been talking more about Putin and the Russian state interchangeably, them having their political reasons for supporting Brexit. But we mustn't forget that there's another dimension as well, which are those Russian oligarchs. Now, the Russian oligarchs have successfully manipulated Russian industry, Russian political thinking and so on, for their financial ends. They've taken all that money, many of which have been obtained by some very dubious means indeed, and they've stashed it away in places like the City of London. So they quite like having a permissive environment in the UK. And by permissive, I mean favourable tax laws, favourable visa laws, favourable property purchasing laws, ability to set up companies, shell companies, with little to no scrutiny. All of that works in their favour. So it is not beyond the realms of possible that this has nothing to do with Putin at all, but those Russian oligarchs have funded Brexit because they want the UK to oversimplify the argument, but they want the UK to become a little bit like a miniature Singapore off the coast of Europe. A nice, lovely tax haven that they can go and have holidays and keep all their money and have lots of fun, whatever it may be. So we should not discount the fact that this Russian money, with extremely dubious provenance, may have funded Brexit and the Conservative Party for very much those almost neoliberal type reasons, if you like, literally to make the environment more permissive to them and to their goals. So we come to the current political topic of why have UK sanctions over Ukraine been so poor? Why have they been so slow? And an obvious answer could be because the Russian oligarchs have funded the Conservative Party. Or the UK government perhaps doesn't want to dig too much into this. Those questions are being asked by the media at this point in time. And if we do believe that the government is dragging their heels because of this conflict of interest, bearing in mind what I said earlier, that there's this perennial conflict between those who fund the parties and those who vote for them. Their interests do not align. And if we believe that the government is not acting in the way that the UK electorate would like, they may say they are, but they're actually trying to drag their heels, then it does bring the very uncomfortable question of what else have they funded? How else have they influenced the way the British government thinks in order to suit Russian ends, whether that be the Russian oligarchs or the Russian state, as personified by Putin? And these are extremely uncomfortable questions, and I don't think we've got any answers now, but we do have a lot of opinions. So perhaps what conclusions can we really draw when it comes to linking the topic of Brexit and dirty Russian money? Well, the more we look into Brexit, the darker the story becomes, the darker we see the influences that drive Brexit. Because make no mistake, as I've said in many videos, there's a whole host of reasons why people voted for Brexit. Some of them voted because they were racist. Some voted because they didn't like the European Union and the project, and they didn't believe in that project. Some voted because they wanted better democracy. None of that applies when it comes to looking at this issue. So those may be the stated reasons, taking back control, taking money, whatever it is that the Leave campaign pushed forward. But actually, they didn't mean control back for the electorate. They meant control for them. And possibly, they meant more control for these oligarchs. That is something. That is a very uncomfortable angle to look at Brexit. And this is in addition to the very awkward fact that Brexit had been linked to the very racist policies promoted by the likes of Nigel Farage. Lots of people voted for Brexit for certainly not to benefit Russian interests and not even for racist reasons. However, those reasons are not what's driving Brexit. And we may think that some of the reasons are links to racism or anti-immigration, as you probably call it, but actually Russian influence is also something else that would need to be thrown into that mix. So what Brexit has done in many ways, and you may even argue this is a good thing, it's exposed some fundamental issues with British politics. And then those issues are nothing to do with Brexit. The fact that the UK political system is corrupt, is easily influenced by very wealthy individuals. It's nothing to do with Brexit. It's just Brexit. They have seized upon Brexit as an opportunity to further their interest, to further their wealth, very much to the detriment of the electorate, and ironically enough, to the detriment of the people who actually voted for Brexit. That is not what they wanted. So where do we go forward in here? Well, this is the theme that I'd like to point out in this channel. It doesn't matter how you voted or what you believe when it comes to Brexit. There definitely has to be a consensus where people realise that much harder questions needed to be asked about what the political establishment has done, how it has influenced, and how it makes decisions, and how it implements those decisions. Is it doing so with the interest of the British electorate in mind, or is it doing so because of more other vested interests? And what this also means is that the whole Brexit project is tainted on so many levels, whether by racism, whether by undue influence, whether by sheer incompetence, whether by ideological dogma. All of that has tainted the Brexit project. And as I say, it doesn't matter which side of the fence you fall on. That taint impacts everything. Brexit has changed everything. Brexit impacts everything in British life. And so you cannot divorce the issue of dealing with that taint to dealing with Brexit. The two have now been combined. That's because Brexit has exposed them in some ways. Will the British political establishment deal with these issues? Only time will tell. And right now that is not looking encouraging. I hope you found this interesting, this little bit of a brief dive into the role of Russian money. I will just say that I do not have any particular insights into this. I'm not an investigative reporter or anything like that. This is all based on reading that I've done from those who have investigated these matters. Anyone who's a regular private eye reader will be familiar with a lot of these themes. I will also post in the video description below a recent interview done by LBC Radio with an American anti-corruption campaigner called Bill Browder. And I found that really interesting, so I encourage you to go and listen to that interview. You will perhaps need to just fast forward to the gaps where the adverts were, just to let you know that in advance. But that is a very interesting interview, and Bill Browder has some very interesting things to say that do link into the topic of this video today. So I hope you found that interesting, and I look forward to seeing people's comments in the comment box below.